Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
These are patriotic Canadians.
Oh my God!
You're now attacking different older people.
You guys are disgusting!
Look at the fucking movement right now. Look. Look. You coward! You sound like
We have nowhere else to go.
My phone dropped.
Practicing
Back there.
I hope it wasn't.
Anybody with us? I see you shaking your head back there. You should be watching this. Take a lesson in courage.
Man, they declared this called the Crusade.
Cowards!
Nazi supporters.
Generation theory. Every generation. Law enforcement professionals, huh?
Oh, you got blown up in Afghanistan, eh? And these guys are going to arrest you and push you back when you serve for your country?
Right. You guys keep those mentions. Resign everybody else to serve them. Go for it.
I don't smoke. I'm dying. Children. You don't know my life. You don't know my struggle. I fought for my shit. I survived the worst. This is nothing.
Tell your boss to stop it, huh?
I've been
Follow
blown
the
up.
law.
Peace and love. And if
No
you think
respect
he
for
does,
human dignity
you're wrong.
whatsoever. We're not livestock to make rich boomers. All serial killers are boomers. I don't said that.
We love you all.
All they want is to be heard.
Can I take a second?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I need a minute.
You are not a serf.
I did surfing once.
We want to
oh
do
man, I
the
hurt myself big
SURF
too.
thing.
No. You don't want to go SERF. That's
Oh,
what
no,
these guys
I-
want you to do. They want you to go SERF.
Oh,
Nuremberg 2, boys. Can't wait to see you there.
I don't want to be here.
You guys' grandchildren are going to be born
I'm much
into
rather be
debt,
home with my wife and kids.
owing a piece of their lives to the state. That's a wounded veteran! Yes! That's a wounded veteran! Yes, that's a wounded warrior right there! They got a shield in his fucking head! That guy's Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up!
Hold on, stop pushing.
Back up! They kicked him in the leg. Back up! Back up!
Hold on, stop pushing.
They kicked him in the leg.
The RCR guy. They booted him. That was weird. Here's the one. The one who booted him was this one. Couture Lazon. He kicked the vet that had the wounded right leg. He kicked him right in the leg.
Oh, he's a greasy one.
This guy right here. Couture Lazon. He kicked him.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Saw you kicking that wounded veteran while he was down there earlier. You guys are a bunch of thugs, huh?
Didn't want freedom would stop everybody from having
No, not at all. You want to keep the rich guys in power right now, huh? Soaking up all the wealth, buying up all those residential properties, turning the millennials into a bunch of permanent renters, reaching into the pockets of the unborn, deciding all future children to be born into serfdom. That's you guys abusing your citizens, huh?
I am the media now.
Just following orders, just like those guards at the ovens of Auschwitz. That's you.
Those financials are getting up for all of our friends here.
Right? You just do as you're told, right?
Moi, j'ai pas la même opinion. These guys are getting in.
Hey, what's up, troops? Jeff Eveley, Ops Sgt-Maj with Veterans for Freedom, back with you now on this 5th day of April 2023. I got a really good show lined up for us here today. I'm going to cover a couple of different topics, and I think we're going to tie it in really well here at the end in terms of what's happening in Canada these days and the psychological operation centered around China. So it should be a good one. We got a great guest with us back here today, William Ray. William's one of our brothers, and he's been active for quite a while in terms of staying on top of this stuff and fighting back. But before we get into that, we'll just do our philosophy meme. This is one of my favorite authors for sure. This is Ayn Rand, and she says, "It is not unity, but intellectual coherence that a country needs. The coherence can be achieved only by fundamental principles, not by compromises among groups of men, but by the primacy of ideas, not of gangs." And that's from The Wreckage of Consensus, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Now, I don't think I actually read that one, but I have read quite a few of her books, including her magnum opus, which was Atlas Shrugged. It's a real beast, but what a book. Talk about some rich characters. Okay. And okay, so this is making the rounds over there on Twitter. Dylan Mulvaney, who is a TikToker who cataloged their transition. So this is a transgender woman, natal male, who transitioned just a couple of years ago, I think. And they did, oh yeah, okay, so it'd be about a year ago. It says here, this is Antonio Sabater Jr., and he says, Bud Light makes special can to celebrate Dylan Mulvaney's 365 days of girlhood. This is from the Post Millennial. And so, yeah, this is Dylan Mulvaney, and she's a TikToker, transgender woman, so born male, and Bud Light is jumping on the tranny train like that's some kind of a good idea. And little do they know, woke, go broke. So here's Kid Rock and his response, on point, I think, very succinct, and language warnings. So earmuffs.
Grandpa's feeling a little frisky today. Let me say something to all you and be as clear and concise as possible. Fuck Bud Light and fuck Anheuser-Busch. Have a terrific day.
Yeah, you got to love those Southern gentlemen. I lived down south for 4 years while I was in the military. They were serving with NORAD at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. And yeah, there's something to be said for the Southern gentlemen. They're right on, I think. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to bring William in here. How you doing, brother? Good to have you back.
Very good. Very good. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, good. You know, keeping on, I guess. It's another day, another fight. Yeah, I got this lined up for you here. William really put this together, folks. He is way down multiple rabbit holes, and I always appreciate the help when it comes to putting this kind of information out there. So, yeah, the guys from V4F and the veteran community more broadly, they know their stuff. And so here's what we got lined up first and foremost, I guess. This is a news release from the province of Nova Scotia, and it says Premier launches Nova Scotia China engagement strategy. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs to get us started here. It says the province launched a Nova Scotia-China engagement strategy today, 28 April, to capitalize on opportunities for growth in the Chinese market. Now, this is from 2016, I should point out, so this is going back a few years now. But back to the article, quote, we believe our plan and our relationship with China will mean more economic growth in Nova Scotia, close quote, said Premier Stephen McNeil. Quote, more exports to China means more jobs for Nova Scotians. During the past 15 years, trade between Nova Scotia and China has expanded considerably. China is Nova Scotia's second largest trading partner. Exports to China totaled $420 million in 2015, an increase of more than 50% from 2014. In comparison, Nova Scotia exported $490 million to the entire European Union in 2015. The Nova Scotia-China engagement strategy has three major elements: to focus on Nova Scotia's competitive strengths in the Chinese market, to build and strengthen the province's relationships with China, to ensure coordinated strategic partnerships in support of Nova Scotia businesses and institutions as they grow this relationship. So, what's going on with this one, Will?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting that people are, it's good that people are suddenly aware that China has a huge influence on this country. I lived in Vancouver for several years, right around the time Hong Kong was changing hands. And there were whole sections of Vancouver built within 3 years to accommodate. And at the time, the Liberal government at the time was basically selling Canadian passports to Hong Kong Chinese citizens. So, yeah, so here in Nova Scotia, so one of the very interesting things I find about the Nova Scotia engagement strategy is they talk very specifically about the universities.
Right.
So you've got, and yeah, here we have internationalizing the university. And in the first paragraph of this document, which, I would encourage everyone to go read, they're talking about the fact that, all the universities now focus on internationalization. Kind of interesting. They get their money mostly from me and you, the taxpayer, a lot of it from the corporate world, and a lot of it from private foundations. But so, I would at this point remind everybody that, see, I've got this gray hair up on my face, so I can actually remember the 1970s, and I remember something called the Cultural Revolution. I just caught the end of it.
Right.
But, this is where very deliberatively Mao Zedong, to retain power, set the Communist Party at war with itself. And it featured, it came through mostly the universities, and it featured things like children denouncing their parents over, just rote ideological points. And if you didn't conform down the line to the ideological points, like there's pictures, you Google the Cultural Revolution, see pictures of some school teacher out there with a sign around his neck, and a bunch of students gathered around yelling at him. And it calls to mind a teacher in BC who was recently fired for displaying stuff from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Wow.
So having Chinese influence in your universities right off the bat, hella dangerous. It's a hell of a port if you want to attack the country, come through its education institutions. And we have seen this shit handed down now to K-12 and all the rest of it. So now, Nova Scotia, for those of you who don't know, is rotten with universities. You cannot spit in this gut. You can't find a hospital that's open or an ambulance, God save you. But you cannot spit without hitting a university. And one of them in Cape Breton, interestingly, this week, there was a scandal involving the University of Cape Breton, which has, out of its student body, 75% are foreign students.
I live here.
And that's apparently the only way they keep the doors open. Because, I mean, there's barely any young people here in Nova Scotia. They fled years ago.
I didn't watch the W5 article on it yet.
Well, apparently, so the deal is, and the thing is, here in Nova Scotia, houses are cheap to buy, but to find something to rent, oh, man. because nobody rents. There wasn't much of a rental population here for years.
Right.
So they found some of these international students living in cars and dumpsters and all kinds of shit, and they're raking them for money.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually live in the area, and you know, a lot of the people that come in here are lovely people. And I was talking to one guy; he's Nepalese, a little while ago, and he was saying kind of what I was sensing was that it's straight up exploitation. They have these guys over there in Southwest Asia, you know, Nepal and India, and there's maybe 2 or 3 of them in different locations, and that's where everybody's coming from. Yeah, I mean, it's a racket, right? So they're drawing them in.
Well, apparently this university, CBU, advertises on billboards and shit in India. Apparently on the W5, they interview a South Asian lady. And she's freaking the hell out. She's like, I was lied to. This is desolate. I'm trapped here now. I owe all this money, because they take some kind of private loan arrangements back home to pay these exorbitant amounts.
They represent something like 2/3 of people using the soup kitchens now as well.
Yeah, apparently. So that's one aspect. Now, the other aspect. Now, I live in the area of the lobster wars that happened about 2 years ago. Yeah, everybody remember that? Fishermen and native guys and native fisheries and yada yada yada, right? Yeah. So what that was cover for was the fact that Clearwater. So when the Conservatives were in under Mulroney, what they did is they consolidated all the lobster licenses, right? So they weren't owned by all the different fishermen and little fishing combines. They were all owned by something called Clearwater, a big corporation. Right. And now the fishermen had to go to Clearwater to get their licenses, and there was a lot of and you know, I'm an Alberta boy, but I've talked to the lobster fishermen. There's a lot of gangster shit going on here.
Oh yeah,
right? And always has been. It's a you know, it's a big money thing. So what that lobster wars were a cover for was the fact that Clearwater, behind the scenes, under the cover of all this native fishery, Clearwater was bought out by a consortium that was advertised as being, you know, part Mi'kmaq. The Mi'kmaq part of this is an incredibly thin smear. They just want them involved to try and claim these. And by the way, I mean, I totally support Indigenous sustenance fishing rights. I will support their right to fish in diesel-powered boats as soon as we find those traditional diesel factories. As soon as we dig those up, you're good to go, guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's based on, you know, at base a ridiculous concept.
Well, and it is that racial segregation that leads to the tension too. I think I know the fishery war that you're talking about. Like there were a couple of fisheries that got burned. There were some arsons.
Yes.
Didn't one guy get murdered? He was dragged, I think, you know, with the anchor. No, or was that was a different? That was
no. There was a point, and I did a video piece that I can send to you on the local fishermen. And there was a point where they put the fishing fleet out to sea because the native guys were just going out there, and they fish in the summer, so they're killing the immature lobster and they're fucking the thing up, right? St. Mary's Bay is warm, so you got a lot of lobster. They use the wrong kind of rings in their lobster traps. Instead of using rings that disintegrate over time, they use stainless steel ones. So this becomes a never-ending lobster death trap if they abandon it. And apparently they abandon a lot of gear, right? Because they're not very professional. They don't know what they're doing. Now, one of the other things, and I can't remember his name, but so the guy leading this merry pirate indigenous fishing fleet was the son of Donald Marshall, who was the guy in the original court case way back where they said, yeah, you don't need a license from us to go fish to feed yourself, right? Or your family. Like, you can go take a bunch of fish and that's not our business because you were here. So the guy in charge of this Mary fishing fleet, who has a different name for some reason. Like this guy used to be a drug dealer in the area. That's what he was known for. Now the federal government gave $6 million worth of boats and gear and shit to his indigenous fishery, right? About a year and a half, 2 years before this. And I've talked to the local guys. So what he did, he sold it all and he just leases it back. Oh, guess where the money went? Guess where the money went? Whoop, right in his pocket. His brother got arrested for not possessing, but making child pornography.
Holy smokes.
Right? Woo.
Lord. Yeah.
So right behind this, Clearwater was bought out by Premium Foods. Premium Foods, located in Vancouver, is a shell company basically for Chinese interests. Right. So what you did is sold the lobster rights to the Chinese. And they've been fishing out these waters for a while.
Yeah. And we spoke before on a previous podcast about the color revolution commie connection, especially as it pertains to the Kamloops residential school lie about.
Well, this was the same deal, though. This was the exact same deal. If you Google and you go back, you look at the CBC, whatever footage of this thing. Oh boy, everybody got a really professionally made flags and banners, on message, worldwide press attention.
Yeah,
it was a setup. The whole thing was a setup. And the local fishermen, God bless them, they didn't give any ground, but they're screwed now.
So
they're
And basically, I guess what I saw, like they're using race, and that's something that's even been said in the House of Commons now, or in committee at least. Where, there was a great quote. I got to pull that video up sometime, but there was
the Poilievre thing.
No, there was an expert testifying. I'm not even sure what his name was. I never saw him before, and one of the Liberal MPs was asking him, like, okay, if there's some kind of Chinese influence operation going on here, can you give us some example of how that manifests in Canadian society?
Oh, the older Chinese fella, I did see that. Yeah.
And he says, oh, absolutely. We've known, going back to the 50s, that China basically controls the WHO. So any information coming out from them, especially as it pertains to the pandemic, should have been taken with a grain of salt. I was like, wow.
Sure.
I love that kind of candor. But they seem to be using race, and this is kind of a theme that I think we may have talked about before, but they're using slavery in the United States to gaslight the population. And the Black Lives Matter didn't really take off here like it did in the US. So they're using the colonialism and how we got to decolonize our minds and all this stuff.
Yeah, but the thing is, but I did a piece on SSRC, all the granting agencies, the big government ones that give you the money to do research in this country. Have all put out diversity, equity, inclusiveness things. So whether you get money or not is going to be based on the color of your skin.
Yeah.
Right. Same in the civil service. They've got hiring. So it's Jim Crow. That's what you call this. If it was being done to black people, you call it Jim Crow. That's what we have here now. And recently the Ontario Human Rights Commission fucking said the quiet part out loud. If you're white, you cannot be discriminated against because blah, blah, blah.
Did they actually say that?
Yeah, there's an article out. Yeah, you can snoop that up. And it has been their policy for quite some time because that is, that's the base of it. But so this is definitely a variation, I would say, of what happened in the Cultural Revolution. And from the Chinese point of view, this is an obvious weakness for us that they really do not share. Right? Because if a minority get uppity in China, whoop, whoop, whoop.
Exactly.
Yeah, you end up in a little camp. You go to camp, right? If this was China, the Antifa would be in camps.
Yeah. Here's China is committing genocide against the Muslim minority in Karamay in the Xinjiang region.
Sure.
Exactly. They're openly racist. I always point to the laundry detergent commercial where Han Chinese woman puts a black guy in the washing machine and he comes out Han Chinese. I mean, they don't even see it as a bad thing. And really, we in the West are the only culture that sees racism as a bad thing. And it's like you said, that's not a weakness that they share. So they kind of exploit that, and they use that.
Well, it's more basic than that in a way, because okay, Canadian or American, or even to a great, even British or English, it's a mix. You know what I mean? Like, even if you say I'm British, well, you're Scottish, you got Germans in that fucking mix, you got all kinds of fucking, some Romans. Oh my God.
Yeah.
You Chinese. That's it. Yeah, right? So your national and your ethnic identity are pretty much the same. That's the way the last couple of generations have been raised.
There are like two tribes, though, aren't there, in China?
There is, yeah, there is, but very much since the revolution itself, and certainly since the Cultural Revolution, you may not think like that.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm Scottish, Canadian, somebody is this, somebody that, you ain't nothing Chinese. You Chinese. That's it. Right. And it's obvious who's you and who ain't you. That's it. So it's very easy. I guess, the other thing I would mention, specific to Nova Scotia with China, and I haven't totally tracked this down yet, but our premier, Tim Houston, has the honor of being the only premier in Canada named in the Panama Papers directly.
Wow.
And you can find us online. I'll send you a link so you can put it up later. He was linked to something called Oceans Holding. He was a board member of Oceans Holding Company. Mm-hmm. I have yet to track down where that goes. But given the timing of his ascension, wouldn't shock me if it maybe went back to Premium Foods or Clearwater or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I said, I think a lot of that is to drive that racial wedge, and they seem to be using in Indigenous groups or pseudo-Indigenous groups, really. Like there was the whole hereditary chiefs thing with the Wet'suwet'en.
Tides funded, created. There's a great blogger. There's an actual Wet'suwet'en blogger. I think his blog's called Northern. I'll have to find it, but he very much details how they showed up and started messing with everybody's hunting rights and everything else, and full control. And there's nothing hereditary about it.
And there was a whole democratic process that had already taken place with a consultation, 20 different reservations, and everybody was on board. And then out of nowhere, this dynasty comes along, and all of a sudden we're back to a monarchy.
Right, but this goes back, color revolution creation. So the Wet'suwet'en they first popped up on Al Jazeera back in 2012, 2013, but they had a different name. They called themselves at the time the Steep Tabernacle. I'm going to have to look, but they called themselves a different name. They changed to Wet'suwet'en in about 2014. Maybe it'll come to me while we're talking, but here's how it happened. A man named Franklin Lopez, who works out of Montreal. Mm-hmm. His daddy was part of Jimmy Carter's Jimmy Carter's cabinet. So this guy is an anarchist filmmaker. He gets paid by Al Jazeera to go out and tell the story of this poor band of Indigenous people who are under siege by oil companies. And again, they had a different name. He does a number of pieces on them, and it's right around that time Tide starts pouring money in and creates the office of the Wet'suwet'en Chiefs. And then the name of the band gets morphed to the Wet'suwet'en. And they say, oh, well, this was just a clan of the Wet'suwet'en people, the first name. And I'm sorry, it escapes me. So yeah, absolutely created out of whole cloth. And if you look at the blockades, the training for the blockades were done at Carleton University between February 14th and 18th of 2018, the year of the Roll On to Canada convoy. The Roll On to Canada convoy was announced. A week later, they announced this training thing in Carleton University, Ottawa. They flew in young activists from all over Canada, billeted them, trained them. They had Aubie Lewis there teaching them media, and they confronted the Roll On to Canada convoy. And they were the ones, that was the organization that pulled off the blockades. They had 4 days of training sessions. One of the training sessions is titled Blockade Training. They also trained in rappelling. They did a day and a half of rappelling training. 4 months after this conference, one of the main guys at it was photographed as one of the people rappelling off the bridge in Vancouver to block the fucking port. All of that is training for terrorism. This thing was funded, and I have an article on it. This thing was funded by CUPE, by the CUPW, by a whole shitload of labor unions, and oh my goodness.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a color revolution. That's color revolution theory behind the thin veil.
And I think it was like Jordan Peterson said that what's in the university today is in the culture tomorrow. And Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. So I think that the Chinese recognize all of that, and it's because they study us. And they're following a model of colonization. I think it's
they also have some very good friends here. I don't look at it like that. The way I look at it is that China, what we know as China, was very much created by the elites as the model New World Order society. That's when they went in the 70s. Kissinger and the CFR went in, and so did the Desmarais family. Andre Desmarais, boy, he went into China big time in the early 70s. He had co-offices with CITIC, which was their premier investment tool in the West. That's why Andre Desmarais has the fucking bushes and everybody at his house. That's why he's so rich. China. Right. Every prime minister we've had has been on the board of Power Corp. Power Corp was built on Chinese money.
There's so much
Stephen Harper was Power Corp.
It saturates everything.
Stephen Harper, Mulroney was Power Corp. And so was Bob Ray, our current UN ambassador, who's pushing to send all our weapons to Ukraine, also on the board of Power Corporation. So this is a cooperative effort of our own elites, right? The lockdowns came out of China. The whole narrative came out of China. People collapsing in the grocery store. Go fuck yourself. Sorry. There's no way your average Chinese citizen can post a video of messed up shit happening to the World Wide Web.
That's exactly what I was thinking at the time too. I was like, wow, don't they have the Great Firewall of China there? It's completely locked down. You might get a few dissidents out there that managed to get to Twitter somehow, but to think that we have
speaking of China and the Liberal Party, I see you have our lovely Canada Chinese. So right away, first thing we did vaccine-wise was announce some big multi-million-dollar deal with the guys who started the disease.
Right.
So right off the bat, any deal like this, it doesn't matter if it's with a private Chinese company, it's with the Chinese military.
Mm-hmm.
They are the only ones allowed to do this kind of shit in China. So we paid like, I don't know, 400 million bucks. We got nothing. But if we scroll down and see who was in charge of this.
For anybody who's just listening, this is a Globe and Mail article here, and it says Canada-China vaccine collaboration began to fall apart days after Ottawa announced clinical trials. So this is from 2 years ago, 2021, and it's there's CanSino Bio. So this is the company that we did the contract with, and like William was just saying, we got ripped off. Like, they just took the money and we never even got a product for it. And it says just a couple of quick paragraphs.
Dalhousie University cooperation. So there's that kind of Nova Scotia thing going well.
Yep. It says an effort between Canada and China to jointly develop a COVID-19 vaccine began to fall apart just days after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced Ottawa had given the green light for clinical trials. Mr. Trudeau told Canadians on May 16th that the Federal Department of Health had approved the first such trials at the Canadian Center for Vaccinology at Dalhousie University. Quote,
vaccinology.
Quote, research and development take time and must be done right, but this is encouraging news, close quote, the Prime Minister said at a morning briefing. The plan was for a Halifax research team to work with a Chinese manufacturer, CanSino Biologics Incorporated, to run the first Canadian clinical trials for this possible COVID-19 vaccine. The AD5-nCoV vaccine candidate was backed by CanSino and China's Institute of Biotechnology of the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, and a collaboration agreement with Canada's Natural Research Council had been signed in early May. Now, and there was the other, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the interesting connection that you pointed out to me here was that we have, where is she? Here we go. Public Services Procurement Minister Anita Anand has rejected the Conservatives' allegations, noting the CanSino project was former Innovation Minister Navdeep Bain's responsibility and did not hinder her negotiations with other suppliers. According to the Canadian press, Canada was the first country to sign with Moderna and the fourth to sign with Pfizer and BioNTech. Okay, so that's interesting.
Where'd the money go? Where'd the money?
Yeah, great question. Like, we'll ever get that. And yeah, they really.
So there you have it. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that, like, the Chinese really kind of spit on us in the early pandemic too. Like, they sent us a bunch of defective masks after we sent our entire stockpile to them.
Well, not to mention COVID itself. You know.
Well, yeah, there was that.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, well, here you got kind of the perfect mix, though. You've got, corporate government Canada, because you've got Canadian corporations involved here. You've got government, you've got university, and you've got the CCP. Mm-hmm. And a bunch of money changed hands, and it's unclear what else happened.
Right. And Anita Anand is our current Minister of National Defense. So she set this whole deal up for us to provide this donation to the CCP. And
she's been doing a bang up job at turning the military into the CCP. So this is Miss Anand with a fella named Sean Dunn. And we're going to come back to him in just a second.
Okay.
So this is Tacteris Technology, based in Alberta. Sean Dunn is the CEO. That's going to become relevant in a second. Okay. Anita Anand, in her capacity as the Minister of Defense, is providing Sean with millions of dollars of your money to develop basically a lot of what they do is drone strike technology. So that's fun. The other part is basically information control systems. So that's what Sean and is getting some money from Anita for. Now, the interesting thing about Sean is he is also a senior serving officer in the Canadian Armed Forces. Wow. The very fucking department that he is getting money from and potentially going to sell a bunch of shit to. Now, Sean came to my attention because he decided to take to Twitter. Now, Sean is in the comms regiment, but his specialty is something called information dominance.
Yeah.
So Sean decided to take to Twitter, and he had the Alberta election was coming up. This is about 4 weeks ago, I would say.
Just for those who are just listening, this is Stormhaven Media. So this is William's site here. Go check him out. He's got some great blogs up there, and talk about some deep rabbit holes. It's really great stuff. And the title here is Liberal Connected Serving CF, quote, Information Dominance, close quote, Expert Interfering in Alberta Elections. As the Alberta election approaches, the attacks on Danielle Smith are intensifying. Since her assumption of the Alberta premiership, Smith has been the target of a highly coordinated political disinformation operation. That operation is now being openly joined by a serving Canadian Armed Forces major who specializes in and was decorated by the U.S. war machine for information dominance. Oh, yeah. So Sean Dunn is also the CEO of a company set to make millions from Liberal defense contracts. So that's Tacterus. Tacterus, yeah. And there's Nita Anon's tweet again. She says, at Tacterus is a Canadian business that develops cutting-edge battle space software for militaries, enabling their effectiveness and excellence. We're proud to be supporting Tacterus's innovation through $1.2 million in Ideas Program funding. Thanks for showing me around.
Put a pin in battle space, I suppose, or more than put a pin in battle space. Everybody should keep in mind that the moment that federal emergency was declared, Canada from sea to sea became a theater of operations for the Canadian Armed Forces.
You check your mic there, William. You sound kind of tinny.
Oh, okay. Well, it could be the word, I suppose. Better?
Nope. But
I can turn it down a bit there. How's that?
Same, but I'll read from the article here for a second. Okay, this is Calgary, September 9, 2022. Tacterra Systems announced today that it hosted a meeting with the Honorable Anita Anand, Minister of National Defense, and the Honorable George Cahill, MP, on August 31st. The intent was to discuss software projects underway at Tacterra, supported by Government of Canada investments through Innovative Solutions Canada and Innovation for Defense Excellence and Security Program. Under development with ISC funding, the Tacterra Orchestra software will enable responders to manage critical resources during major domestic emergencies. Well, now, so they're buying battle space software. This sounds like a weapon system to me, because that's what we would call, say, the software that we use to run air operations and stuff like that in a NORAD context and in air defense environment.
Sure, but tactical and surveillance comes under that umbrella. When you're in the tent with all the screens on, a lot of it is just tracking shit, so you know what to target.
Exactly, like that's all it is software, but it's purpose, that matters here. This is warfare, and we're talking about during major domestic emergencies. So ominous.
Well, Dunn served in Afghanistan. That's where he was awarded for information dominance. So in Afghanistan, you're dealing with, full whole of government, whole of society penetration of the population to achieve the aim.
Mm-hmm.
And again, whole of Canada was a theater of operations during. So,
right.
So Dunn took to Twitter, and he had a bunch of stuff. He was analyzing Danielle Smith's Twitter account, saying all her followers were bots. But the other thing he was doing was he had an analysis of the convoy donations by hour and by region. So he must have had all the metadata for the convoy people.
He had all the metadata from the Give Send Go, the Give Send Go hack.
Yeah, okay. That's what he was analyzing, was the Give Send Go hack.
Your mic is still a little tinny there, so I'm just trying to make sure that we're hearing you correctly.
So that's illegal under the Criminal Code of Canada because that was hacked.
Right.
So, yeah, so I pointed that back out to the National Investigation Service and to a captain in his regiment that I spoke to this week. And, yeah, I asked, first of all, I want a written assurance under the signature of the commanding officer that this was not a Canadian Forces influence operation.
Wow.
In no way was the Canadian Forces operating during a provincial election. Given this man's position with the forces, the fact that I don't know, did he use government software to do this analysis? I mean, maybe not. He owns a company that does it, but he certainly used skills. He was using a skill set that the taxpayer trained him in. And that, and especially that kind of activity. So his Twitter account, in his bio, right off the top, serving Canadian Forces.
Wow.
So,
well, yeah, and there's
prohibited political activity to my mind right off the bat. Never mind the illegal act.
1,000%. QRNO is 1936, 1914.
That he has a company that profits in the tune of millions of dollars from the political federal ally of the party he's attacking or the party he's supporting.
Right.
That stinks.
Oh my God, yeah.
And they've already got a couple $1 million out of this program, and God knows what else. I have no idea.
So is this his unit here? This is 5th Canadian Division Influence activities. So yeah, 5th Canadian Division, that's in Atlantic, Canada, and we have this influence activities unit here. It says activities that are planned and conducted to have behavioral and psychological effects in support of the commander's intent or mission. The key enablers of IA are psychological operations, or PSYOPs, and civil military cooperation, or CIMIC. So here's what they're into, related links, civil military cooperation. So I got that here, and here's the civil military cooperation.
So just to give some of the listeners a little background, so I was in the Canadian Armed Forces. I got out in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
We did not have, at that time, any sort of organic unit within the Canadian Armed Forces whose sole job was to deal with civilian authorities. And if you have a look at this, in the second paragraph at the end sentence, it's not just civilian authorities, it's non-profit groups.
Wow.
And businesses, corporations.
Right.
So that definitely didn't happen. We definitely didn't. I mean, if the Red Cross was doing some shit, wanted to talk to us about providing them with something okay.
Yeah.
No, did not exist. And the fact that this thing is a permanent stand-up is disturbing.
Yeah. And
because why do you need that? We're not currently at war.
So yeah, and it's domestic operations, and
yeah, and I mean, like okay, so I used to be in Shiloh, Manitoba, with the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery, and so every second in spring, what are we doing, man? We filling trucks full of sandbags. We headed from Winnipeg, right? And those are big, complex operations involving civilian infrastructure, civilian first responders, the civilian population. We're housing these people, feeding these people sometimes. So our G3 officers would at that time go ahead and make some phone calls and go, hi, my name's Bob. I'm with the Army. We're on our way. What do you need us to do? Who do I talk to? Where do I go? Right? There was no, you know, and of course, over years, these people would build relationships. Whatever division G3 there in Manitoba, I'm sure he knew the Winnipeg chief of police and the mayor and everybody else by first name, because every 2 years we're going up there.
Yeah.
Right. But this is very disturbing, and the corporate connection is disturbing. And if we can move on to the next one. So as they said, the important legs are civic military cooperation and
Psychological operation.
psychological operations.
Okay, you're coming in a little better there. Can you give your microphone a tap? There's something getting better.
I don't know.
Okay, there you go. Good.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, psyops. That's fun. And at home and abroad. Now, why in the literal would you require psyops in a home operation? Because the only thing we're doing at home, okay, so if it's disaster relief, you don't need to do psyops. We're coming to give you some food and sandbag your house. You don't need to convince them to let us do that. They'll let us do it. I've been there. They will. The other would be aid to the civil power. And in that, we're not supposed to be, Oka comes to mind. The Oka standoff with the indigenous people there. Ridiculous situation.
Tap the mic.
All right?
Yep.
Okay. So Oka comes to mind. So we didn't unleash psyops on the people of Quebec and the people, the natives, I guess we did tactically. The boys were broadcasting all kinds of shit at them at night. Right? Like, give up. You cannot win. That kind of stuff. But this is tactical psyops. This is trying to convince them not to take on an army with tanks. And again, we're not making moral and judgments about the operation itself, but we certainly did not have organic stood-up units like this. This did not exist.
Right.
We had military intelligence within it. It had this capability, but that was for use on operation abroad.
Right. Exactly.
They would not have conceived of unleashing this here.
No. So this is crossing a line here. I'll read from the page a little bit here. This is the psychological operations of the 5th Canadian Division in Atlantic Canada. It says, do more. We're the next challenge in your career path. We'll introduce you to new ways of thinking about warfare and new ways of executing in theater. While on expeditionary operations, you will work on the psychological plane, galvanizing support, winning hearts and minds, and shaping perceptions of specific target audiences to achieve victory. Learn the tactics and strategy of influence and content with people across a wide spectrum of media. Work at the highest levels of to plan, create, and deliver messages that resonate. Come away ready for your next challenge, equipped with the tools and knowledge set to set you apart. This is
now. I would note at this point. I wrote an article way back. Okay, where are we here? So it surfaced in the mainstream media toward the start of this thing that military's COVID-19 influence campaign sparks investigation, development of new rules to govern information operations. So this came out August 4th, 2020. Now, the narrative was that some guys in the Army had decided to come up with this crazy plan to help control the population. So I'll read from the article here, and I quote, am I open? Sounds okay?
Yep, you sound good now.
Yeah. The campaign, quote, the campaign, which called for shaping and exploiting information, was designed to allow the Canadian forces to maintain order during COVID-19 and convince the public to follow government direction.
Well, now
it was a combination of traditional communications methods using public affairs staff in addition to influence activity. Specialists in various techniques to get military and government messages across to the public. In addition, a separate investigation has been launched to determine whether the unit collected public records. Now, this is made more disturbing by the fact that a couple of years before this, the military, about a year and a half before COVID, the military was caught here in Nova Scotia putting out fake news about wolves. So they'd already been practicing on the Canadian civilian population. Yeah, so the thing that struck me about the narrative there is that's not how the Army works. There's nobody in the Army that's going to generate a detailed operational plan without being directed to.
Right.
So that direction for any Leo operation at all has to come through CDS. So Woke Wayne had to approve that shit. He had to. Right?
Sounds
so
about
yeah,
right.
now we've got Influence Activities Task Force.
Yes.
Woo-hoo.
Yeah. So this is the same unit again, 5th Canadian Division. And, trades at our unit, the IATF seeks smart and fit members from across all trades and service branches. So this is like an in-house recruiting campaign, I gather. So
yeah, same with the psych warfare. It said if you're looking to a new challenge in your career, so you have to be in the forces second. Yeah,
yeah, it's like the human candidate selection program there for
sure. Yeah,
HCAP and all that. They always recruit from the forces for some of these kind of weird things out there in spook world. It says, this is what I find interesting here. It says who we are. As the functional center of excellence, the Influence Activities Task Force mission is to promote, enable, and synchronize influence activities capabilities in support of the Canadian Armed Forces across the full spectrum of operations. So that does sound like that's that's not just deployed ops they're talking about there. They're talking domestic and deployed, right?
Yep.
So something to watch out for. IATF provides stewardship for capability development for the preparation of personnel in both civil military cooperation and psychological operations training. So yeah, that's all like I say, very ominous for the Canadian Armed Forces.
Again, not a organic unit that we possess at that time at all. Like we didn't have anything like that. We had really shitty capos.
Just from what their websites say, it sounds like the recruiting campaign is on. Like this is something like a capability that's being built, right?
Well, and this is where I was going to tap into your experience. Is I think a lot of this, the difference between my army and the army that exists today, started in Bosnia after NATO took over, because you had the Canadian Army soaked in this NATO command structure and then straight into Afghanistan, and yeah, there's been a sea change, and a lot of this Americanized type of shit like we're seeing here has come in.
It's kind of hard for me to say because, you know, I came in 2001. I'm a post 9/11 world kind of guy, right? So I didn't really have the perspective of coming right out of Bosnia.
Right, but when you're in Afghanistan, like it's not like the Canadian Army's over here and we're doing our shit, but we kind of, we operate with NATO. This was very integrated. So at the command level, it was incredibly integrated. So the people that are the commanders today of these kind of units would have cut their teeth in the NATO organizations in Afghanistan and the latter part of Bosnia.
I mean, maybe I couldn't say one way or the other just from my
I'm
experience.
not saying it is so. I don't know, because certainly the attitudes I run into, holy fuck.
Yeah, I think that there's a kind of progressive and globalist view that there's a streak of that in the brass. You know, they're just as elitist as all the other elites in Canada, essentially, if not more. But in my, just if I'm to draw from my experience, I mean, I worked at a tactical unit that was with the Canadian Air Detachment, so I didn't really have I wasn't in one of the talks or in the, the tactical operations center or the or strategic or anything like that. But we fell under like ISAF command. So there were all these coalitions that were formed in the wake of 9/11, and some of it just had to do with stabilizing Afghanistan. So there were all these different countries who integrated into the command structure that I guess skeletally was, I think I just made that word up, but the skeleton of it was what was NATO, but there were a lot of other countries that came and tagged along. So it was, and it's war, so total chaos. Like, frig, man, we don't even know how many people were there. I think I heard estimates between like 17 and 35,000 or something. I'm like, well, that's a pretty broad estimate, but
sure.
But yeah, I don't know.
It was also a lot now in that last.
It was so international. I don't even know if I could call it like a NATO mission.
Sure. Okay. Well, so there you go. Like, so back in the day when we're with the UN forces, let's say, and it sounds very internationalist, but we very rarely dealt with anybody but Canadians. We're doing Canadian Army shit in our little fucking area, and if we got to talk to you, we'll talk to you. But I'm certainly not going to take orders from you, and I don't work with these guys per se, and neither did our command element that much.
Right.
Yeah, just interesting the sea change, but so these activities, so I have to wonder how much of the government nudge operations were carried out by these units.
By these, by these units. Okay.
Whoever did that, you're a treasonous son of a bitch.
And tyrannical. Like, these are the kind of activities tyrants engage in, and I see things happening. Like, I'm always focused on what Jodie Thomas is doing, because she was right at the center of the Emergency Measures Act. She was the first one to say that you will get legal briefings that will explain how it's okay when we do it. She was the one, who said openly, no, I don't think you can just dismiss, tweets threatening our prime minister as threats to national sovereignty. So it's the senior bureaucrats, that are really kind of driving the bus.
That was probably part of the start of the actual downfall, and a lot of people aren't aware of this. So the Canadian Armed Forces became that in 1968 when the Army, Navy, and Air Force were amalgamated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so put all of the different services into one thing. What most people don't realize is at the same time, it was also melded to the civil service. Uniquely in NATO, we are melded to the civil service. So at the senior levels, these people are more like civil servants and soldiers, very much more.
Now that I see, that is very salient. And I worked in NDHQ, National Defense Headquarters, for the last 7 years of my career. So yeah, you're telling me.
Fuck, I went there once.
But it was, I'll tell you, the course of my career, I went from the tactical, where I saw this corruption there, to the operational, like with NORAD in the US, and it was the same corruption there. And I'm tracking it. And when I got to Ottawa, I'm just like, oh my God, it's everywhere. When I get here, and yeah, that's people talk about that a lot. Like, say, in Tarnished Brass, that was a theme in the introduction, at least, about how that integration led to this like yuppie culture in the upper echelons of the brass, and now it's more of a corporate kind of bureaucratic culture, as opposed to a distinct military ethos.
And a lot of crossover into the corporate world. Ernie Vino, way back when he finished covering up for Somalia, he went straight to PAE and SNC Lavalin. There's a lot of mix with the. I interviewed once a guy. He was a colonel in the RCR, and he had been commander of the Northern Zone for a few years. gets out of the army and goes on the board of a diamond mining company in the north.
I remember the general who pinned my first campaign star in Afghanistan. That was Maynard, General Maynard. He was the guy who got RTU'd. He got fired from Afghanistan. I don't think, not for the, playing the hide the commissioning scroll with the administrative assistant there, civilian, as soon as you hit the ground. This is in 2009. Operation Medusa is on, so Canadians are dying left, right, and center, and that's what he gets up to as soon as he hits the ground. And I don't think it was that got him RTU, though. I think it was the second time he negligently discharged his weapon, and that time was right in front of the Chief of Defense Staff. So yeah, at that point, it was one of those things that they just couldn't sweep under the rug anymore. And he got his ass booted back to Canada, and he was demoted to colonel, retired as a colonel, of course, got a big fat pension regardless. And he went to work with, I can't remember the company, but he went to work for a company that he had awarded contracts to or had dealings with or something like that through his position in the military, flagrantly violating all the conflict of interest, QR&Os.
Cooling off period shit. Yeah.
So,
but so did, what's his fucking nuts, Leslie. As soon as he got out of the army, he went to work for some fucking big defense contractor and fucked the waiting period.
Yeah.
So you have the corporate world with a huge hold. Now, with the civil service, you also have this very underworked bunch of people who they've been working on for years. They go to these international civil service conferences, and they get, and of course the whole thing benefits them because they become the new apparatchiks.
The other thing that really, like, they all have in common as well is they're all the university educated elites.
So, well, that's the indoctrination center.
Exactly.
Right? Like that's how you can guarantee ideological compliance, because the last 10 years for sure you can't get through. Oh, and there it is.
Yeah, speaking of ideological indoctrination, here's the Canadian Army tweet from the other day. March 31st, it says, today on the International Transgender Day of Visibility, we reaffirm our commitment to providing an open and inclusive working environment that allows Canadians to serve their country with pride and foster a culture where everyone is free to be their authentic selves. And so they get slayed in the comments here. I think they got ratioed to hell. Let me see.
Oh, yeah.
But
they actually came out with a comment that said, hey, if you don't like it, fuck you.
Yeah, that's right, too.
If you go up, I think it's one of these guys here.
Yeah. The Canadian Army supports the dignity and inclusion of all persons as part of our military ethos.
Except white guys. No white guys.
Yeah, that's right. Every member of the One Army team is entitled to work in an environment where they feel safe and respected. I never did. Comments that are derogatory or hateful in nature will be removed. And then it says, for those who are unwilling to accept all people into the One Army team, including Indigenous people, women, visible minorities, people with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ2+. Ooh, I don't think that's the current thing. That's not the current.
Oh, yeah, no, they got to add some more letters.
Bigotry, yeah. Communities, yeah, because it's 2LS or something. It starts with a 2 now. Communities or support for them. We suggest you no longer follow this page. Well, that's too bad, because we pay your salaries, and here are some patriotic taxpayers here. They're saying, disgusting. I mean, disgusting. Hormone blockers have bad side effects. Puberty blockers do permanent damage. Let's talk about our youth having their breasts removed. What a disgrace you are. And
and it's more than that. There is a CFAO, and I can't quote the number, but a CFAO that directs non-gendered language in communications. So when that lady Skybird died, Skyhawk. No, she wasn't a Skyhawk guy. Snowbird.
Oh, sorry. Snowbird, yeah.
Yeah. Internal Army documents couldn't describe her as a woman.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yup.
Well,
so this is, well, you want to talk cultural revolution. This is it, right? This is the thing that's ripping people up. Even in rural Nova Scotia here, it's fuck ass ridiculous. There's no scientific basis to this at all. This shit comes from a woman named Judith Butler, who wrote a book in 1991 called Gender Troubles.
Yeah,
Judith Butler, interesting side note, she lists herself as having graduated from Yale, but actually she took most of her education at a place called Bennington College. It's one of those deals where you take 3 years at the other one, then you do the last year at Yale. Oh, you have Yale stamp. Bennington, the U.S. State Department made a documentary about him in 1951 because they had helped them, and I'm quoting here, re-engineer German society after the war. So, interesting side note there. A lot of the Board of Governors had 3 initials in common, C, I, and A.
Speaking of which, here's the National Center for Transgender Equality Action Fund, and it says the 2018 Trans Equality Now Awards. And here we are, the Now Awards. This is from 2018, and it's at the Hamilton Live, Washington, D.C. And so, yeah, okay, they're celebrating 15 years of NCTE Action Fund, celebrates 1 year, blah, 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 Transgender Equality Awards. And here are the awardees. I thought this one was really interesting. This is Valerie Jarrett. She was Obama's chief of staff, who I believe took up residence with him when he bought a house, 10-minute bike ride from the White House in Washington, D.C. after he retired as president. So they were there for several years before he moved out to Martha's Vineyard. And yeah, she had an office at his house, I believe. And here are the sponsors. And this is all coming to me by way of William here, by the way. So Gilead, that's an interesting one we'll come back to. But further down here, Central Intelligence Agency, the United States of America, sponsoring.
When in your life, anybody out there, have you ever seen the CIA openly sponsor anything? They sponsor a lot of shit, but not openly.
Jeez, I got it highlighted here. I can't get to let go.
So that was, so I ran into this when I first started looking into where in the hell is this crap coming from.
Right.
And yeah, when I mean, my jaw dropped. Now, again, what?
Yeah, it's incredible. I like how you set it up earlier with the CIA connection to the Maoist Cultural Revolution in China too.
Sure.
And also we have this sponsor that I mentioned before, Gilead. And again, William sent this to me. This is Donald H. Rumsfeld, named chairman of Gilead Sciences. So, swamp creature extraordinaire, Donald H. Rumsfeld.
Well, but there's a connection here, right? There's a connection here. So, how the fuck, how do you get the people in a democracy, in the most open, freest, most diverse societies that have literally ever existed in human history? Mm-hmm. How do you get them to hate those societies? How do you do that? Well, maybe you go to war all over the world and you make sure you involve all the democracies and you do a bunch of just horrible shit for 10 years, useless, horrible shit. Yeah. Now, how would you kick that sort of thing off, one wonders? Maybe some urban renewal in New York City.
Well, I'm not following. Urban renewal in New York City to kick off
the war on terror. Well, what kicked off the war on terror?
Why kick off the war on terror?
What event started? How did you go to Afghanistan, bro?
9/11.
Boom. Where them 2 buildings just fell down.
Oh, okay. So so that's a reference to 9/11, the urban renewal.
Well, I mean, look at all the war on terror, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. Did we militarily win them? No.
Not now. No.
We controlled the oil and resources before 9/11. I don't know who doesn't know that, but yeah, we controlled all that beforehand. because we control shipping, refining, all that. So it's possible that the bombs dropped in Iraq and Afghanistan on all those weddings, all those drone strikes, weren't actually aimed at Iraq and Afghanistan. They were aimed at our democracies, because how do you get an entire generation to hate their nation? How do you get feminists to think that wearing a hijab is
I don't know.
I mean, that's deep down the rabbit hole, but it is hella interesting that a number of the corporations and the people connected to 9/11 tangentially are connected also to COVID.
Yeah.
People going south about McKinsey running, the liberal thing.
Yeah.
McKinsey in Iraq.
Happy Mike.
Yeah, so a lot of this is connected down. You have to wonder, why does the Canadian Army think it's so important to back transgender rights?
Yeah, exactly.
Domestic influence operations.
And I do see that as part of the broader PSYOP. It's essentially whatever weakens the West is true. And, if we're talking about the Chinese, then yeah, they'll go after the kids, try to, well, obviously weaken them, destroy them psychologically, their health, and,
the very sense of reality.
Yeah.
The very sense of reality.
Yeah.
I mean, so you go to school nowadays, you stand up and do some, and I'm sorry, absolute bullshit, indigenous acknowledgement.
Yeah.
We're not on unceded land. I'm not on unceded land.
No, I know.
It was ceded. Y'all want to uncede it? Strap up, boys. But not this. But it's not indigenous people doing this, to be clear.
No.
It's teachers' unions.
Right. It's the elites.
Yeah, so the idea here, and they'll, you read their internal literature, they'll say it, is what they call to decenter and destabilize white identities. And what they mean by that is the idea of democracy and a fact being a fact, i.e. now they're pushing 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
If I was a Chinese, I'd be laughing my fucking ass off.
Exactly. And I think we did a really good show here a little over a month ago with Unconstrained Analytics, and they really broke down elements of the PSYOP, especially as they go back to the Frankfurt School, Hegelian dialectic, negation of language. And
who was in the Frankfurt School? The guy who's credited with sort of creating identity politics.
Michel Foucault.
No, it's crap.
Jacques Derrida. Herbert Marcuse.
Yes, Mancuso.
Yeah.
What do you think he used to do, bro?
What?
He worked for the OSS and then the CIA, Google it. It's on his Wikipedia.
Oh my God.
Yes.
That's crazy. So, wow. Yeah, all roads kind of point back to the CIA. Now,
well, if you understand, I mean, the CIA, there's a good mainstream movie that strangely kind of tells the true story of the CIA. It's called The Good Shepherd.
Okay.
Matt Damon and company, and yeah, it shows some rich boy who goes to a Skull and Bones guy who joins the CIA with all the other really rich guys.
Yep.
Right. So this is a class thing. Right? So these people are part of the oligarchy. And that's why they created the CIA. You look at who created Allen Dulles, you can go back to Dulles worked for a huge law firm right before him and his brother became CIA guys. That law firm did a lot of business for the German Reich in America. Made sure the money kept flowing. Yeah, Sullivan Cromwell. that's where Allen and his brother, the two Dulles brothers, worked, and that law firm did what the CIA ended up doing. They would pave the way for the United Fruit Company and whoever else. They'd pay whatever bribes, have whoever shot. So they just got the American taxpayer to foot the bill for it. Right? You look at, like the hate America thing has been going for a while. You can find these memes and t-shirts that say, all the countries America's destabilized the government of in the last 50 years or whatever.
Yeah.
None of that shit was actually supported by the American people. None of it was done democratically. It was done behind closed doors.
That's a good point.
With bullshit events like the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yeah. That is a good point. And I try to highlight that a lot too. It's more like, and especially what I've seen in my lifetime after 9/11 and the response to that. But it's more like the elites feel the need to treat us like children, and they don't want to like when it came to let's say the troop surge in 2003 into Iraq. Now that was opportunistic. They were just rolling on the momentum they built from going into Afghanistan, and with that the second war, it was pretty clear that they did it for profit. It was for a lot of the rebuilding contracts and this kind of disaster capitalism that a lot of these corporations are engaged in now, or they're creating the disaster in order to profit from it. And there were all those conflicts of interest with Halliburton contracts and so on and so forth. But yeah, like when they're doing their speeches, there's all these buzzwords: coalition is willing, and war on terror, and it's like they feel the need to scare us into going along with this instead of actually building the case and giving us the facts. So I think there's there's a kind of paternalistic instinct at the highest levels of the elites right now, where they seem to think that we are their flock and need to be.
A lot of it tracks back, and a lot of the current crop, and the grandfathers of all these people were hardcore eugenists. So was Bill Gates' dad, Mr. William Gates. And me, when I first started looking at identity politics, I did an article about 5-6 years ago. When I started tracking it tracked back to the eugenics movement, and the game plan has been the same. They pump private money into universities, create a body of scientific evidence for a few years, and then they've already got legislation ready to go. Like EGAL had legislation ready to go in Ontario in 2016 to make this transgender thing a reality. Right? Bill C6 is simply a copy of what Ontario brought in. EGAL had that legislation pre-written for the Wynne government. EGAL was funded by the Wynne government. EGAL gave out money from that funding to universities to produce studies in psychology and shit that say, oh yeah, this is a thing. These guys are going to whack themselves if you don't cut off their penises.
Right. And what I saw with that, now that goes back to Bill C-16. And that, again, this is something, like you say, this is something that just kind of came out of nowhere. The Liberal government federally passed Bill C-16 back in like 2015, almost as soon as they got in there.
Right, but it was a carbon copy of a bill already passed in Ontario, and I can't name the year, but it had been passed a couple of years before in Ontario. That solidified gender identity as being a thing.
It was the incorporation of gender identity and gender expression into the Ontario Human Rights Code, and even the federal legislation said that the Canadian human rights tribunals would be looking to the Ontario human rights tribunals for like guidance and for example and precedent. And it was like you say, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's something they had on the shelf ready to go as soon as they got into office. And so they brought the gender identity and gender expression under the Canadian Human Rights Act, and that has since been interpreted by the psychological associations like in Ontario and the provinces as requiring the gender affirming care model. So they can't discriminate against somebody on the basis of gender identity or gender expression by denying them access to their gender affirming care. And that's what leads to the so-called transitioning of minors. These psychiatrists, like there's a narrative, I think.
So there's a couple of
science.
things. Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. So one is it has also pushed this concept in law, Canadian law, called mature minor consent.
Mm-hmm.
And this is incredibly dangerous. This is the idea that your child can consent to shit on their own and that you have no business.
Yeah. And Ontario is the most nightmarish of all the provinces because the legal age of consent for the biomedical transition is 12.
Oh, Jesus, yeah. So, that upends, obviously, the traditional. So part of this is an attack at the base of society, the family unit. Because how many families now that have some kid comes home, they're transgender. And under the law, if you say anything about this, you could be charged.
Yep.
You could be charged.
And they came, one of the unanimous votes during COVID in the Commons was Bill C4.
All in cons, they voted, yeah.
To ban the conversion therapy, which when people hear that, they think about. But that's
the one I'm talking about there, the conversion therapy. It would make it illegal if my son came home from school and said, I'm a girl, and I said, no, you're a boy. Yep. That could be a criminal code violation.
It already is law, and what it says is if you take your gender dysphoric child to see a qualified psychologist for talk therapy instead of or before going straight to the hormones and the puberty blockers and surgery, then they will put that parent in jail.
Yep.
That's conversion therapy.
Sure, yeah.
Talk therapy.
Yeah. So this was a whole of society operation. Absolutely. So that legislation came in at the same time they brought in these massive changes to the school curriculum, some of them in Ontario written by Mr. Dalglish, who subsequently went to jail for pedophilia or child pornography.
Child porn, yeah. He was the guy who developed the SOGI program, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
So that got, this is the crap. So they came in through the school, through the media, and through the government with blinding speed.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, like in BC, they did 3 readings committee and voted on the bill all within 24 hours. It was voted into law at 10:30 at night.
Yep. And cui bono, well, big pharma definitely does because
big pharma, mining, big corporations, period.
Yeah.
Right? Because if they get rid of the family unit of society, they run it. I mean, this is what you're looking at. Fuck Trudeau. It's the corporations behind him that are trying to get you.
I'm always saying that. It's Trudeau's just the Wizard of Oz. Like, it's not like he's ever had an original thought.
I met this man. I can tell you. On several occasions, I tried to interview him several times as a media guy during the student strike in Quebec, right? Because I thought, well, why are you saying something about this? They're beating the fuck out of kids, blah, blah, blah. So I spoke to him a few times. This man is a fucking Muppet. Yes. He's a Muppet with eyelashes that a model would stick her Prada heel through your neck for.
Yep.
But there's nothing behind him, pretty blue eyes. I talked to the man. Ain't none there.
No.
If somebody don't hand him a line, he doesn't know what to say.
Exactly. He's a himbo, and he's just the guy who reads the lines. He's never even planned a birthday party in his life. He's not the one. He's not the one behind all this. It's the hegemony behind him that needs to be gutted, dethroned, or overthrown, however you want to say it. I mean,
right, but this didn't just pop out of nowhere. This has run our lives. This probably sent our grandfathers to war in Europe. The exact same groupings of people, and people need to start getting their heads around that.
Yeah, I'm always espousing the fourth turning and Strauss-Howe generational theory. I don't know if I ever actually plugged that with you before, but yeah, Strauss-Howe generational theory says, and this is a theory about demography, right? Like changing demographics. And it says that basically vast swaths of humanity are caught in this 4-generational cycle of total war and collapse and rebirth. And so if you count back 4 generations, you'll see the Second World War, the American Civil War, the American Revolution, which was, concurrent with the French Revolution. And then before that, you got the Salem witch trials and so on and so forth with, the Dark Ages and the witch hunts and the Crusades, all the way back to the dawn of the species. And so we go into these major crises every 4 generations because what happens is the generation that surmounts the previous major crisis, they come back from, say, the Second World War, pour more steel and concrete than any other generation before them or any generation since, and usher in all this new technology, everything from radio, telephony, SATCOM, vaccines, the whole shebang. The modern era, and they raise their children as indulged during this time of rebirth called a high. It's a social high, as in the mood is very high, and there's a lot of new opportunity and a new technology, and so that generation that's born in the wake, when they reach peak institutional power in their early elderhood, just prior to retirement, when everybody's at the peaks of their careers, they're the ones who tyrannize us, and that's the boomer generation. It's an interesting theory. It's they follow the generational archetype of the prophet, as in the people who found our religions, like the Prophet Muhammad. They start off as self-righteous narcissists that are going after their elders for being morally bankrupt and their society for being spiritually bankrupt and this kind of thing. And they usher in the new spiritual awakening in their early adulthoods, like the hippie generation. And the new religion, in the words of the theory, is postmodernism, or what people would call wokeism, I guess, in the pop culture. And it does come out of academia. And you mentioned Judith Butler before, so that's a pretty good example, I guess.
Right, but I mean, I get what you're saying there. It's sort of it's kind of the idea of strong men make
exactly that idea.
The thing is, though,
it's a thing. It's like Star Wars. So Obi-Wan Kenobi is the elder prophet figure, and the hero archetype, which would have been the GI generation in the last crisis, that would be Luke Skywalker. And then there's also the midlifer, who's the culturally recessive generation, Generation X. That's what do you call Han Solo, right? And so we're kind of the smart ass generation that's looking at Obi-Wan and saying, yeah, I'm not so sure about all this Force stuff. I'll believe it when I see it. And looking at Luke Skywalker and saying, yeah, okay, kid, just try not to get us all killed. And it's the same story basically over and over again that you see Old Testament, New Testament. And
well, with this, I think certainly there was some deliberation here, because the thing is, so Judith Butler, so with identity politics, you have really sort of 3 main pillars. You have the racial part, privilege, white privilege. You have the gender part, and you have intersection, which kind of weaves all this garbage together, right?
Was that Crenshaw?
It was Crenshaw, yeah, and that's why it came in through the legal system. That's part of why our legal system's so fucked up, because
just for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with some of these authors, like Judith Butler is, she's the brain mother of gender as a social construct. And Kimberly Crenshaw is, she was Harvard Law, I think, and she's
no, she wasn't Harvard. She was Stanford, because she was also a member of the Quillen Choir, which is a sister organization to Skull and Bones.
Wow.
Yeah. So the thing is, the other one, so the white privilege, that comes from Harvard. That's a lady who calls herself Peggy McIntosh.
Okay.
But so the thing is, strangely, all three of these women published their seminal works in 1989. Judith Butler, her book that came out as a trade book called Gender Troubles, which was originally a paper submitted in 1989 at UCLA. Crenshaw's seminal work on intersection, 1989, at wherever the Quill Inquirer, whichever university, I think it's Stanford. And Peggy McIntosh wrote her little my knapsack of white privilege at Harvard, all in 1989. Same year, strangely enough, that global warming is mentioned for the first time in public in a U.S. congressional hearing.
Well, now,
just some scattered facts.
Yeah. And it's all of the things that you just mentioned, all these different theories, they all run in that postmodernist kind of bent, you know. Yeah.
Well,
so
they were taken into critical theory and used. Exactly. This is what we call wokeism: is critical theory applied to these three things.
Exactly. It's and that's Foucault. He's
the author and his buddy from the CIA.
Yeah, and so that harkens back to what I was talking about with the awakening era of the saeculum. We're talking about a saeculum, and that's the rhythm and rhyme of history. Like you said, strong men bring good times make weak men bring hard times create strong men. And then the cycle continues. And so the strong men bringing good times, that's post-World War II era. And then the awakening era, when that's when Foucault would have been the radical university professor, I believe it was Berkeley. Sure. And
sure.
Because that was the Berkeley riots, right? Where the National Guard came into there was a shooting. A lot of them got shot by the National Guard, and it was a big mess. Summer of Love. That's that generation, the Summer of Love generation, sort of the original hippie snowflake generation of academics that, they're the academics now.
Sure, but I mean, so if you look at it, so you had kind of a cycle in the United States.
Right.
Maybe unrelated. John F. Kennedy gets his head blown off in Texas. Then immediately afterward, the United States goes into the Vietnam War, highly unpopular war, divides society. It also radicalizes a lot of society. And then academia starts steering that radicalization. Is any of that sounding familiar?
Yeah, I think we see that happening now on steroids, because back
then, the war on terror was used to radicalize academia. Shit that academics would have never accepted in schools before 9/11 became acceptable during the war on terror, because, oh my God, look at how horrible this is. We gotta stir up the system. Look at this shit.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to find that connection, but I think that it's the same generation getting older in academia. They were the draft dodgers when they were the students, and they're still the anti-war movement, anti-American movement in their early elderhood, where we are now. And with respect to the Vietnam War, I often point out that was a perfectly just war that was analogous to the Korean War. In fact, it was the second Indochina War, and Korea was the first Indochina War. And of course, the whole effort was to contain the Chinese Communist Party and its allies. And not only did the boomers, and only the boomers, not the silent generation, who also fought in the Vietnam War and got drafted in both Korea and Vietnam. It wasn't until the boomers aged into the draft that the deferments went up by like 2,400%. And the ones who did go, they gave us fragging, which was they would murder their own officers in their sleep if they tried to lead them into combat. And get rich shipping opium back to the United States in their coffins. Over 800 officers they murdered, or people that were fragged in their sleep. And also the term shotgun, which was, how they used to smoke dope in the field. That's how they ended up spending the war, was smoking dope.
But who was it that created the Golden Triangle? Who was it that was shipping heroin out of Vietnam to support the Hmong tribesmen? Who was that?
The CIA?
Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby. One of the guys that set up the Golden Triangle in the 60s in Vietnam. There was across the border in Laos, where they were not supposed to be fighting a war, was a tribe called the Hmong. The CIA turned the Hmong into a private army. They funded this army off the books by shipping Hmong grown heroin out of Laos. One of the men in charge of that was a man named Richard Secord. If his name sounds familiar, it's because you're familiar with the Iran-Contra hearing. Yeah, baby. Because he was shipping drugs out of Nicaragua.
In order to fund, that was the Noriega affair, wasn't it?
Yeah, man. And Freeway Ricky Ross, the biggest crack dealer in LA in the 80s, swears to God he got all his crack from the government.
and that was to fund the juntas in Nicaragua.
Sure, but in general, intelligence agencies, and not just the CIA, have used drug running to build up off the books capabilities that even their governments can't control, because if you can't control the money, so
this is an interesting one for me, and I'm going to try. I don't know if this is playing devil's advocate or not, but I'm always looking for the whys, the hows, the whys. Those are the things that really matter most, right? And where we are right now, I can't help but feel, that maybe I wish the CIA had been a little bit more successful in driving communism out of the Western Hemisphere with the kinds of operations they got into in South America in particular. I mean, I'll point to Chile. I'm afraid I'll have some blowback coming for this one, but it's basically a success story. I know that was General Pinochet, and they got into some pretty hard tactics there. And the Ford Motor Corporation was sponsoring the hell out of it. They all of the junta, they drove around in the Fords, and that's what people got disappeared into, were the trunks of Fords and stuff like that. So that's how they finance these things without going to the taxpayer, and it gets really messy and dirty and greasy, and they deal with these gangsters. But Chile is probably the best country to live in South America right now, so there's that.
I mean, these countries,
well, they were bankrupting in Vietnam.
I mean, the thing I would say about that is the Ford junta, the Ford family. I mean, that's not the first government they helped put in power. They helped put some fellas in power in Germany back in the day.
Oh yeah.
These people have one interest in mind, and it ain't yours.
No.
They want control. And again, they go back, and that's what's frightening about COVID. These guys all track back to eugenics. They want a lot less of us.
I agree, and I'll just tell you kind of why I'm kind of shit testing some of this stuff and putting a different lens over it.
Well, it's a good idea.
It's because of when it's taking place. It's about its location in history relative to the previous major crisis. Because, like I said, they espouse this idea of a cycle, and it's a 4-generational cycle, and that's the saeculum. And so where it's taking place in the saeculum, I think, matters, because the eras of major corruption would be during like the major crises, being the Second World War. And so, a lot of the things leading up to that would be analogous to what we have seen in our saeculum since 9/11. So there was the First World War, and then everything, that was a proxy war essentially. And then you had the Great Depression. The stock collapse of 29 was precisely analogous to the global financial collapse of 2008. That's the catalyst, the minor crisis that starts the fourth turning, the fourth generation to reach peak institutional power after the previous major crisis. So I could see the previous profit generational archetype in the wake of the First World War, and of course they were notoriously failed to engage in any diplomacy with the Treaty of Versailles, and basically drove us right back to war with the Second World War after the Great Depression. And so it's all very analogous. But what's happening with the juntas? So that would be more like around the 60s, and I think that would be the greatest generation at peak institutional power at that time. So that would have been the World War II veterans who built our institutions in the modern era that were at peak institutional power at that time, and they were going bankrupt in Vietnam, trying to contain communism there, and they still had this threat in South America to deal with as well. So I can't help but think that, like, I'm trying to put that cyclical lens over it, and I think maybe what's happening in South America is a legitimate effort to contain the threat of communism, but it gets really greasy. I think they go to some.
Well, I mean, what I
lengths.
would add to your equation there, though, is if you go back to there's a fella named Anthony Sutton. So he worked at the Hoover Institution for like 30 years, and he really researched the Russian Revolution. And he came away from that believing that it was sponsored and subsequently supported by a lot of large Western interests.
Mm-hmm. I'll throw back for a second. I was thinking about this guy
like
earlier.
They may have been playing a bit both sides, yeah?
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And I agree it's all just, sickening essentially at the end of the day. But sometimes, I don't know, they get up to some pretty greasy dealings just to get the job done, I think. And then in others, they're legit trying to exploit us and tyrannize us. And I'm throwing to the $20 bill here because this is Andrew Jackson. And he would have been an example of another profit generator from a previous great crisis, and he prosecuted the Trail of Tears. And I find this example fascinating. So that was the genocide, the Trail of Tears of I forget which tribe it was, but it was
an indigenous, it
was an indigenous tribe around the Appalachians, I think. But I'm not clear on the details. But anyway, so this is a guy who prosecuted a genocide against indigenous peoples. He's on the $20 bill, and he used to close his correspondence with indigenous peoples as "your father, Andrew Jackson." And so when I talk about the paternalistic impulse amongst the elites, I'm talking specifically about this particular prophet generational archetype. And again, it's the same one that we see in the Old Testament during crisis eras. With everything from, Yahweh in the Garden of Eden, Abraham, Moses, Muhammad, Noah. Every time you see the elder prophet with the long gray beard, that's major crisis era where the rest of us are dying. And this guy would have been at peak institutional power during a fourth turning in American history. And so that's what I find I see happening in different eras of the saculum, depending on which generation is a peak institutional power. There are the ones I think that are getting up to some greasy dealings because they are legitimately trying to contain communism in this example. And in others, we see those who seek to rule over us, and they have that kind of streak of megalomania in them that comes from, I think,
I think I would agree with you insofar as I do think some of what we're seeing now is being driven by the fact that some of the people who created a lot of this architecture are very old men. I think they want to see their work come to fruition. So I think some of the sloppiness we're seeing, this rush to the finish line, if you will, might come from that. So in that, I suppose that would go along with what you're saying.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And I do tend to favor Hanlon's razor as well. Never attribute malice when ineptitude will suffice to explain human behavior. And that's one thing, you know, I have a lot of respect for all kinds of different conspiracy theories out there and stuff. And I've been down all kinds of different rabbit holes. But there's just one thing I can never really get over, and that is my lack of faith in leadership. It's you know, just the human penchant for ineptitude, sloppiness, the WEF, like, I don't know, they're doing such a great job of being a conspiracy because it's out in the open. And really, like, look at these people. They're not impressive, you know.
Yeah, but again, they're frontmen. I mean, fucking Klaus Schwab is fucking nobody. Anybody whose face you see is nobody.
I agree.
They're the puppets. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, like the WAF, it's like, look at this. It's all these guys. You get rid of these guys, and it'll all be fun. No, it won't.
No,
I would agree. I would agree with that.
I tie all that stuff back to China personally. I look at everything from well, obviously the WHO, like we said before, WEF. I put those in the same basket essentially, and also the UN. I mean, and there's just so much of that sweet yuan out there, the Chinese yuan.
Sure, and you know, if these guys, if they could make the world China, they'd be pretty happy.
Yeah. Yeah,
and that's really, if you look, that's what they're driving to do. They modeled it out in China, right? Because you don't have mass revolutions in China, right? They keep them just enough drugs, just enough consumer goods.
Yeah.
Right? Life ain't so bad.
Yeah. Treat them like livestock. And
sure, but it works. I mean, look at these fucking monkeys here. I still see monkeys wearing masks at the goddamn grocery store.
Yeah, knock it off, guys. You're making us all look bad. I think they just told us to put the masks on because they were trying to get us to stop buying all the toilet paper. The whole thing is absurd.
It's conditioning.
And you're right. It is conditioning. And
right, because here's the thing people really need to keep in mind. They didn't do this to you. There aren't enough policemen and soldiers in this country to keep you in your house with some paper on your face when you go out. There aren't enough. Mm-hmm. If even 20% of people or 30% of people had said no, it would have been game over. So they didn't do it to us. We did it to us. We did it to us because they understand how to do this shit. And I'm going to have to get going and put my kid to bed, but I'll leave you with one last trivia tidbit.
Alrighty.
So MK Ultra, a lot of people know a little bit about it. The part about programming, assassins and all that crap. So one fact is the Canadian government was a full partner in what was going on in Montreal. That gets forgotten a lot. So we were getting the product of this too, not just CIA. Number two, MK Ultra was a huge batch of programs that spanned some 30 years. In fact, at one point, it was the main focus of the CIA. And so in the 1970s, early 1970s, the church commissions and stuff were coming up. So the CIA knew that they had to go in front of Congress and were going to have to answer some questions. So a man named James Angleton, who was in charge of the MK Ultra programs, ordered some 78% of the material destroyed before the hearings, right? Because you can't turn over shit that ain't there no more. So back in those days, when you deleted a file, it wasn't quite like now you push a little button on your screen. Back in those days, you took like this paper fucking thing we called a file folder, kids. And inside that were like papers with like the shit you see on your screen, but on a paper. So when you deleted a file, so these guys literally, he had a bunch of minions go in some location and they had a bunch of big burn barrels, right? Mm-hmm. And they had to physically burn all these files. And you might know this from your service. When you do burn barrel shit, it's not just you throw some shit, you light it up, you walk away. Oh no, you gotta stir, you gotta make sure it's all gone. All of it. So a couple of these guys at least got a little lazy in that they would dump the contents of the files and then throw the file folder to the side. So we got some of the file folders. And it would seem that the 70%, so, but a couple of things to keep in mind here. The 30% of MK Ultra shit that we all know about is the shit he figured was the least damaging. The 70% he destroyed mostly had to do with group behavior modification. That's the part they wanted to hide. So these guys have been getting ready for this for a long time.
Mass formation psychosis.
Shit, yeah.
I would agree that this stuff has definitely been on the back burner for quite a while. But again, I'm looking at this the cycle, and I think that these tools are being turned against our own populations at a really alarming and unprecedented level presently. So yeah, there's this combination of factors, I think, that's happening, and it's really all kind of coming to a head right now. Yeah, I think that's a good note to end things on there, Bill. This has been really a great chat, man, and it's always informative and educational when I bring you in here. I'll tell you that. Like, a lot of this stuff is stuff that I have some awareness of, but just the depth that you have, I really appreciate it, man. It really kind of fills everything out for me very well.
Well, I appreciate being able to get it out there, because you know what? None of this does any good sitting in my fucking head, does it?
No. Same here, man. I'll just drive myself crazy ranting to the house if
the wife will slap you to death sooner or later.
Yeah, right. All right, brother. Until next time, stay frosty.
All right. You have a great night. Ciao, everybody.